But we are glad you are here. This is the seminar that your competitors won't go to, and they'll go out of business because of not attending this one. This is the one that's not glamorous, but this is really a make or break subject, commissioning your building. And we got a great set of expert panelists here who are going to help us explain why that is. But I have lived through this. I've held the hand of people who have lived through this as a consultant or as a colleague when things go wrong because you didn't plan for commissioning and testing and maintaining your facility. So welcome. Again, I'm Rob Eddy, Resource Efficiency Horticulturist. If you're just coming in right now, we'll get started on the presentation. Carmen, can you go to the next slide and we'll start our introductory material. First of all, let's do a poll, okay? And we'll be doing this throughout the seminar. This, you see it up here on your screen now. You don't have to do it at this exact moment. It'll stay up until we start the next speaker. So the first one is, what role do you play in the cultivation space, either where you work or if you're a consultant with us today, you can also kind of, you can indicate that as well. Next slide, please. So this is the fourth of a series of webinars sponsored by Southern California Edison. We want to thank them for this great support so we can bring this information to you, expand our network, make new friends, and especially helping growers and vendors come together and make smart decisions about their CEA facilities. During the webinar, you'll be able to ask us questions. You can write it in the chat or the question and answer, and then we will answer that as we go along. We'll also have a question and answer at the end, as you see at the bottom of this agenda. After the welcome and introductions, we'll have 3 technical sections, each conducted by one of our expert panelists. First one is understand how to commission integrated equipment. The second one is commissioning from design phase to post-planting. I'm going to say that again, from design phase to post-planting. This is not something you think about when you're 2 weeks away from getting the keys to your new facility. And commissioning from a grower perspective, that's going to be fun too. And there's some stories of things that go wrong. So I think you'll want to hear those stories. And lastly, we'll have some incentives described by Caleb Hayhoe from ICF, which will help you to perhaps find funding to reduce the costs of your capital investments and your operating expenses. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to move on to introductions of our expert panel, and then I'll talk a little bit about REI. Next slide. Here we are. I've already introduced myself. I'll just say that my background, in case you want to know, is in greenhouses and in indoor grow rooms for research. And so I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to these topics, and that will come out. And no doubt that nerdiness will be exposed during this particular webinar. Next, I'm going to have Chris Androney from Priva introduce himself. Chris, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Chris Androney. I've been with Priva for about 13 years now, and my role with Priva is system analyst. And my job mainly is commissioning new projects and maintaining existing installations. So I get a lot of traveling in and get to meet a lot of people in the greenhouse and a little bit of the indoor industry as well.
Great. Thanks, Chris. I've worked with Priva for a long time. Great company, great partner to REI, I should say, helping us with our nonprofit mission to improve the resilience of the CEA industry. And speaking of great partners, Mike Zartarian, can you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Zartarian from Zartarian Engineering here in Boston. We design facilities, commission them, and then help operators optimize them during operations, and sometimes that means recommissioning the facility. And we do this for both in the cannabis and commag markets, greenhouse as well as indoor. And I'll be mostly focusing on indoor today.
Great, thank you, Mike. We're going to skip Josh. We got some technical oh, wait a minute. We got Josh Gerovac coming in here. We're having some difficulty with his link. This is awesome. And then we'll skip Caleb Hayhoe. He'll be in here in a few minutes since he's going to come in at the very end. We don't want him to have to sit through 90 minutes. Josh Gerovac, do you mind introducing yourself and your company to the audience?
Yeah, not at all. Sorry for the technical difficulties, Rob. Hopefully I'm coming
You're
through
right here,
clear.
man. Right here. Brought it in into the wire.
Hi, I'm Josh Gerovac. Actually used to work with Rob when we were back at Purdue. That's where I went to undergrad and grad school. I've been in the California regulated market, running operations in cultivation facilities for the past 6.5 years. Just kind of stepped away to doing my own consulting for firms that are really running into all the common problems that will probably be addressed during this talk. So, especially when you're commissioning a new facility. So excited to be a part of the panel to bring my insights.
Yeah, and thanks, Josh. And I would point out that it's rare to get someone, a grower, speaking on one of our panels that has both floriculture experience and the cannabis experience, and also industry experience. Josh worked for Fluence for a number of years, Fluence Lighting, but the floriculture industry is where a lot of the legacy equipment and systems were designed for, and so it's a great place to get a grounding in greenhouse production. And then of course the cannabis industry has a whole nother role and has a whole nother set of technologies that they can kind of claim fame for, particularly the cannabis industry with the hydroponics that seemed to explode when that industry came online. But we'll keep moving. Next slide, please. So the learning does not stop at the end of this webinar. You have access to the virtual classroom for this series, which has recordings of the live workshops, also some tip clips from us, and downloadable resources, particularly our best practices guide, which I'll talk about in a little while. Next slide, please. Here they are. So one of the things we do besides hosting webinars is we create best practices guides. We put together an industry working group. I distill their expertise into these guides, and from that we use it as curriculum for these webinars, for articles, for blogs, for lots of things. We also bring together academics and industry folks when we write these water circularity or best practices guides. Most recent one was water circularity. It was so much fun to do. It was like one of the very first on this topic, at least in this hemisphere. And we think you'll find it very helpful for treating water, reducing your water footprint, and just learning more about how to become more aware of where your water is going and how to reduce waste. The benchmarking report is the other thing that expresses the other thing that RII does really well. We have a benchmarking platform called PowerScore. We work with growers who provide us utility bills and their productivity data. We work with them and we come up with KPIs of their resource efficiency. And this report is the first one of its kind. It's hard to get companies in the CEA industry to share their information because they don't want to go first. And they're just worried that someone might judge them harshly, but we are the ones who first got them to agree to provide us some data, and that is summarized in this benchmarking report of 12 different greenhouses and indoor farms in the US. Next slide. I'm having too much fun today. Okay, so here's the benchmarking. Here's the sort of things that we do with it. We track energy consumption, water quality, and production. And you can compare once you start doing this with us, you can track your progress in resource efficiency year over year. And just starting the last few months, we've begun to move to a month-by-month platform, so you can see your progress month over month. This is absolutely free to do, this benchmarking with RII. So look into it and contact us if you're interested in doing it. Next slide, please. Okay. Bryce, can you help us with the poll results from our very first poll?
Can do. Yeah, it looks like in our small group today that we've got a good spread of roles in the cultivation space, with consultant and advisors being the top choice and most present here today.
Awesome. Followed by growers. It looks like, oh, this is going to be great. All right, next slide. So we're going to move on to our first technical discussion by Chris Androney of Priva on commissioning integrated equipment. Before I hand it over to Chris, we'll do our next poll. and you can answer this anytime while Chris is talking, all right? So it's how many zones do you typically look to control? Whether or not you're a grower or if you're a consultant, tell us what is the typical number of zones you see when you're working with your clients. That'd be very helpful. This gives us, really helps us to know how to tailor our message to you today. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Great, thanks, Rob. Thanks for including this. Kind of hit it on the head. Yeah, commissioning is super important. It's often overlooked and not approached properly. I'm going to cover a couple topics from a greenhouse perspective. First is going to be integration and how key that is for a successful and efficient greenhouse installation. Number 2 is going to be prepared. 3 is going to be does it work in manual? So what do we need to have ready for commissioning? Who are the key people involved? And post-commissioning, what do we do now? And next slide. So here's a good example of, just a small portion of a greenhouse installation. On this illustration, we can see lots of equipment. So fans, climate screens, lighting, ventilation, sulfur pots, and then also quite a few sensors involved as well. So ECPH sensors, temperature, CO2, humidity sensors, PAR sensors, all kinds of things installed in a greenhouse section. And this, again, this is just a small portion of what it takes for a successful greenhouse. You may not have all of this equipment, but these are some of the common things that are involved. And all of these pieces of equipment need to talk to each other to make sure that everything's running efficiently and properly. Next slide. So a great example that I could think of was, as far as integration goes, energy curtains opening in the morning. So if you think about kind of a cold winter day, some cold winter days are colder for some others if you're in the north, but kind of all the same. So if we have our energy curtains closed and we want to open them in the morning, you think of a cold day, you have a cold layer of air sitting on top of that energy curtain. So first thing we need to know is, all of the information that goes into commissioning. So we're going to ask ourselves, how much information can we gather on this installation here? So we're going to say, how much energy savings are we getting from the curtains? Typically, that is a spec that's provided by the curtain suppliers. Then we need to know how much area are we covering for that specific control area, and what are the outside conditions. Once we have all that information put in on initial commissioning, then we get ourselves in that situation where the curtains want to open in the morning. So our control says, okay, hey, we want to open the curtains. First thing that needs to happen is the heating system needs to adjust. So the heating system anticipates the curtain opening. We need to know how cold it is above that curtain and how much time do we need to adjust. So we need to make sure that we have all the proper information as far as energy savings goes. We need to make sure that all our sensors are reading properly so that the greenhouse control can react accordingly. And we need to make sure all of those pieces of equipment are working properly as well. Are the curtains working properly as well? Are the curtain position sensors calibrated so we know exactly where the curtains are at any given time? Also, if we don't have curtain position sensors, are the proper run times put in if we're running the curtains on time? Is that mixing valve working properly? So when we turn on the heat to offset the temperature in the air, do those mixing valves open properly? Is the sensor reading properly? Once the heating system gets time to adjust, then the curtain's going to start opening. And what happens then is we're going to crack the curtain open slowly, and we're going to allow some of that cold air to come in. As that's happening, we need to make sure that that curtain's opening properly. We need to make sure that our temperature outside is reading properly. We need to make sure our curtain above curtain temperature is reading properly. And we need to know that the curtain or the temperature inside a compartment is reading properly as well. So after that curtain cracks open slowly, it gives a chance for the climate to adjust, and the curtain's going to make another move. So it's going to wait and watch the inside and outside conditions to decide how quickly the curtain can open to maintain a stable climate. And at the end of the day, when we're opening that curtain, we want to make sure that we're not opening the curtain too quickly, which is going to cause a dip in the temperature. Or say we offset the heat and the curtain doesn't open properly, then we're going to get a rise in temperature as well. So properly commissioned equipment ensures that integration works seamlessly and ensures a stable climate. Next slide. First thing we're going to look at when we're preparing for commissioning as well is there's lots of information that we need to gather. And all that information, having that on hand is going to save a lot of time. So there's some greenhouse information that's needed. So we're going to look at how large are the growing areas. That's one of the first questions I ask when I get to site. What type of materials are used, whether it's a glass greenhouse, poly greenhouse, whatever it may be. What type of heating equipment's used? Is it hot water, forced air, HVAC? We're going to ask what type of cooling equipment's used. So active cooling, whether we're using air conditioners, or passive cooling, whether we're using vents. And then we'll also look at what type of irrigation is being used as well. Flood floors, overhead irrigation, drippers. Once you have all that information, we're going to look at equipment info as well. So motor specs. So when you're getting all of your equipment from your providers, we're going to look at motor specs. So vents, we need to know electrical capacity of those vents. Pumps, we need to know flow. If we're looking at curtain specs, we're going to again look at the energy savings, radiation savings. All that information is going to go in the computer. So our reporting comes out properly. Our equipment compensating is going to work properly. We also look at lighting specs. So if we're using LEDs or HID lights, we want to know how much light we're getting from each of those fixtures, and also how much heat as a byproduct we're getting from that equipment as well. A big one that I ask is when I'm commissioning irrigation, have all your flow information ready. So if you're using flood floors or flood tables, if you're using drippers, have all your dripper counts ready. Another important thing is having recipe specs. So have in mind what kind of recipes you want to use, so you're not trying to figure that out when somebody's there waiting to commission a system. And then also your pump information. We want to know how many valves we can water at any given time. If maybe we can run 2 valves at a time or 3 valves at a time. We need to know that information ahead of time as well. And then also your energy information. So your boiler specs, chiller specs, cogen specs. All of that's super important to have on hand just to make sure that commissioning goes as efficiently as possible. Next slide. Once all that equipment's installed, as part of our pre-visit, we usually ask the end user, does the equipment work in manual? So pre-checking the equipment from manual control saves time during commissioning. Usually what I say is if it doesn't work from the switch, it's not going to work from the computer. So if you have manual control built into your panels, it is very important to check that ahead of time, because if you go to commission something, it's not working from the switch. Of course, again, it's not going to work from the computer. So it's nice to have that ability to check ahead of time and make sure all of those controls are working properly. Another big one are limits set, pump rotations checked, has irrigation been flushed? So limits, as an installation gets further and further to getting finished, sometimes tables are getting installed. Maybe limits for vents or curtains are hard to get to. That's very important. It's often time consuming to get a ladder or a boom lift in to set those limits. So having all that done ahead of time is very important. Pump rotations, of course, you want to make sure your pumps are pumping in the right directions. Another we run into some funny situations with irrigation. Has the irrigation been flushed? Yeah, you sometimes find some dirt, sometimes some plastic shavings from installations. Then we also find some strange things too, like rags or all kinds of different stuff. So make sure the irrigation's been flushed ahead of time. That's very important. And then also a pressure test. Has that been completed or performed? Causes quite a bit of delay. If you go to run an irrigation system and you find all kinds of leaks, then the gluing has to be redone. And then of course you have to wait for the gluing to dry. Very important to have that done ahead of time. Another thing too is, has point-to-point been done to verify the sensors, make sure the sensor's been wired correctly. Point-to-point's very important. You can make sure all of that's done ahead of time. I think I've lost count of how many times that I get to site and everybody says, yep, all the sensors are wired. And then you come to a big mess of wires and nothing's labeled or everything's wired wrong. That's often very time consuming to figure that stuff out. So having a point-to-point done as far as possible helps quite a bit. And of course, to sum it all up, pre-checking is key for commissioning to run efficiently. Next slide. A couple other things that we need to have ready for commissioning. I often tell growers, have a growing plan in place, temperature, humidity, what kind of climate settings are we going to use? Think of a real world example of once the plants are in, ready to go, what are we going to use? It's a nice time to put those settings in and get a chance to try out the greenhouse climate while you don't have any plants in place. Another thing is, what's our irrigation strategy? So are we going to water on a time clock? Are we going to water with sunlight as a condition, temperature, humidity, whatever it may be? Have that all in place. Yeah, oftentimes I tell a grower to write something down and have that ready to go. Another big one is be prepared to test irrigation. So if we're testing a dosing unit, have all your nutrients ready, have your acids, your lyes ready on site for test runs. Usually if I'm testing an irrigation system, that's the first question that I ask, and hopefully the grower has them on site. But oftentimes, yeah, they say, okay, yeah, we're going to order it. And you're waiting till the end of the week, and then you run out of time to test all that stuff. Another big one is have your handheld meters on hand for verification. So temperature, humidity, EC, and pH. Once I leave site as a controls commissioner, yeah, I'm going to rely on you guys to have temperature and humidity to check that everything's working properly. You want to double verify everything. So if you have a handheld temperature and humidity sensor, you can go around and test all your measuring boxes, make sure that everything's reading properly. In the case that something needs to be calibrated, you're going to be able to check that with your handheld meters as well. Same thing with ECPH. As part of an irrigation and commissioning, I'll run some irrigation cycles to an open table, or if it's a dripper system, I'll get a bunch of cups and then I'll put cups out in the greenhouse, and then I'll test that with a handheld ECPH meter. So having that on hand is important for commissioning, and then also after commissioning going forward, running your everyday operations. Then another nice thing is have areas prepped and ready for climate condition tests, testing irrigation cycles, just to make sure everything's running optimally. It's nice to have those open tables while you're running irrigation. If there's any issues like a leak or if something's not dosing right, it is nice to be able to run to an actual table or drippers just to make sure that everything's going to be running properly when you do get plants in the area. Next slide. And then another thing is having the proper people on site for training is invaluable. Quite often, I'll get to a site and they'll say, oh, we don't have any growers hired, or the grower's not able to be there. I think that this is one of the most important things. Yeah, nowadays, with kind of the things that have been going on the last few years, we've gotten pretty good at adapting to remote work. But I find when you do remote training, you have a time scheduled and you say, okay, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., we're going to do training here. Yeah, there's always a question and answer period at the end of the training, and then the meeting ends and you kind of go on with your day. When you have people on site ready to go for commissioning week, face-to-face interaction allows for that practical training and discussion. So I find the relationships you build during that time and kind of the knowledge transfer that happens is much, much better than doing it remotely. On-site training lets end users benefit from a blend of theory and hands-on learning. I do a lot of training as part of my role with Priva, and I guarantee you if I talk for 3 hours, I can put you to sleep pretty quickly. So what I like to do is I'll set some time aside, and having people on site allows me to say, okay, for an hour, we're going to go over some theory, and then we'll go walk out into the greenhouse. We'll take a look at the panels we've provided. I'll explain where all the fuses are, how to operate everything manually. And then we can go look at sensors too. We can say, okay, yeah, this is how you check a sensor. This is how you replace a sensor. This is how you calibrate a sensor. It's a lot nicer to be able to walk with people and kind of go look at that and put hands on it to learn all that stuff. So that's pretty important as well. And then, yeah, I kind of touched on it already. Building a relationship with your control provider is important for networking. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about my job is I travel around. I get to meet people like Rob, and you build those relationships. So next time that you have an issue with one of the items in your greenhouse that has been commissioned, you can call that person up and say if they're available. You can say, hey, I'm having an issue with a vent motor. Can you give me a hand with this? And yeah, those relationships are nice to have, and you can reach out a lot easier with your control providers. Next slide. The other thing we look at is what if the installation's ready? This is a big one I find when I'm going on site. So if providers and suppliers are scheduled too early and controls can't be commissioned properly, kind of the number one thing that's sort of a mistake with commissioning a new site is a lot of people have in mind that they say, hey, yeah, sooner the better. We'll just get everybody here. We'll figure it out when you're on site. Quite often I get to site and yeah, you can make work and you can find things to do when you're on site, but if there are things that aren't ready to be commissioned, then they don't get commissioned. And it's kind of a waste of time for yourself. And it's kind of, it's not efficient as far as the commissioning process goes. So as a result of that, if stuff isn't properly commissioned while somebody is on site, a follow-up visit might be needed, which could lead to a delay. If you have somebody scheduled for a certain week, maybe they're busy for the next 5 weeks and they're not able to come for another month. And then also unexpected costs too. If you set unrealistic goals for commissioning, you have people in the wrong order, then you might have to pay for another site visit to come out. So that kind of hurts you there. Another thing is, if you don't have the proper preparation ready, the proper personnel can't be trained properly or on time. And then as a result, unexpected crop issues can be resolved. So of course, delays, if you're a vegetable grower and you have your plants ready to go, ready to install in the greenhouse, maybe they get too large at the propagator. Maybe they don't get installed in time. Maybe equipment's not working properly. So that can be a result of that could be crop issues. And number one thing is plan for the unexpected. I know it's hard to plan a project like this. There's going to be delays. There's going to be things that you don't expect. Of course, on paper, it's easy to say, have everything planned properly. Just plan for the unexpected and leave yourself lots of time for commissioning and do your best as far as scheduling goes and planning goes. And that'll go a long way to make sure that those visits are efficient. Next slide. And last but not least, that title there should say what happens after commissioning. But verification continues post-commissioning. So it's not that when I go to a site and I leave site, that's the last you're going to hear from me. Verification should always keep happening. Of course, once plants move into a space, so if I go to a facility that has an open compartment with no plants, the conditions will change. Fine-tuning post-commissioning is a must. You get the plants in, the climate's going to change. You're going to get higher humidity. The temperature is going to react differently. So fine-tuning after the fact is very important. A maintenance standard operation should be developed. Do sensors need to be checked or calibrated? That's very important to have in place as well. And is the equipment running properly? That all leads back to our example of the curtains opening. If you have one of those things that isn't working properly, then it can cause unstable climate, which could lead to results in your crop that aren't desirable. So checking is very important going forward. And last but not least, are there any other resources available from the vendors to continue learning about the systems? When I leave a site, I get people signed up with our Priva Academy, and that's just a series of online learning modules that the growers can go through. So I do my training, I get the customers or the end users comfortable with using the system, but then they can continue learning going on. So if they want to take a course on irrigation later on and they want to learn a little bit more on top of what I've already taught them, they're able to take that on their own time. So that's very important as well. And that's about it.
Great, Chris. I'm gonna keep beating this dead horse, but this is the information you need. Chris just laid it out. You're not going to get a chance to have someone who has that in-depth knowledge of your control system, in this case, Priva and Chris, but of course this applies to other companies as well, on site in front of you for 1 day, 3 days, however long commissioning. You take advantage of that. You've got to break everyone on your construction team, the owners of your facility, the financial folks who want to be first to market. You got to break them of the idea that the date of first occupancy is when they can move in. You've got to keep talking this up. You've got to have the plan. as Chris laid out, you need to make sure things already operate in manual. You'll need to have things on hand, like the fertilizers and the acids. You can check the injectors. There's a long list. And of course, your contractor or your vendor like Chris can tell you this is what we need. He just did. This is crucial stuff, and you'll never have this chance again. And like you said, you're building this relationship, and that does have just unintended benefits. You not believe how great it is that I knew Chris, and so I was talking to him on the phone. I'd met him. He'd been to my facility. He understands my culture, and that is just absolutely crucial. So there we go. I'm going to keep saying it. Thank you, Chris, for that great start to this program.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I'm glad you're here. Bryce, do you want to tell us about the results of our second poll?
Yeah, of course. Well, with those that are controlling rooms, we've got a pretty even spread, with going all the way from 1 to 3 zones all the way to 10 plus. So good audience today.
Excellent. Great spread. Next slide. All right, we've had one great technical discussion. Let's move into the second one, which I have a focus on indoor. This is great. It's going to be Mike Zartarian, but before I hand it over to Mike, here's another poll we'd hoping you can answer on what control systems do you use. Okay, we'll leave that up, and I'll turn the mic over to Mike Zartarian. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Chris. This is a perfect bookend transition to what I'm going to talk about. So we are involved in facility design, and we call the process of getting up to where a vendor like Chris comes on site to check out all the equipment. We call it port commissioning. And then after he leaves, oftentimes we will act as the technical representative for the owner, with the grower in conjunction with them to talk to the various vendors to coordinate things. And this is something that we did not anticipate doing and very much fell into doing, especially with smaller indoor cannabis grows, because we found that this was not covered. A lot of times there is not a one integrated vendor for all the systems like Priva. It's a lot of disparate systems, so things fall through the cracks really easily. So at the outset here, Rob said to leave time. So a couple weeks between when construction is done and plants move in is critical. I haven't seen it happen very often. That the plants are sitting there. There's regulatory issues, especially with cannabis, as to when those plants have to be in there. So leave time if you can, and also leave money. A lot of these projects, especially during COVID, when costs went up, were out of money by the time it was time to commission things, and there was not funds to fix the problems. If you don't fix the problems at commissioning, they will many times they'll never be fixed and they'll never function. Lots and lots of facilities out there don't have lots of equipment in them that's never worked because it was never commissioned, and now we're operational, and now it's too much time or money to go in and fix it. So yeah, this is a critical thing, and I thank RII for bringing this topic up. It's super important to making sure that facilities operate efficiently and energy is a big, energy efficiently, because a lot of these systems have to do with energy consumption. So next slide. So we are there usually on day one at the paper stage, and commissioning really does begin at the design stage. We're thinking about what this system is going to do and how it's going to operate from when it's just on paper. And all the stuff that can be caught at this stage is very inexpensive compared to catching it all the way after it's built and everyone's standing there with plants in the rooms. We say bad news early is good news. We can find this stuff. And we call them scope gaps, stuff where it turns out there are all these systems, they all have vendors, but no one's responsible for things. A great example of this is the piping through the walls. Different vendors, for fertigation. So we know who's responsible for the gear in the water room, in the fertigation room. We know who's responsible for the stuff in the grow room itself, but a lot of times the pipes that go from go between those two rooms. No one knows who owns it. Sometimes they don't get it installed, or they get installed after the fact. So these types of things we can check for on paper long before they're they become a problem in physical reality. Next slide. So same thing during construction. It's important to inspect things as they go and kind of be doing as much of the commissioning checklist that Chris was talking about as construction is going through. Again, it can be fixed then and there, over the course of an 8-10 year plus construction project, at a reasonable pace, and usually without a lot of additional cost, instead of having to do it the week before the Priva shows up to commission the system. So next slide. So the way we approach the plants in phase here is we actually bring a lot of handheld equipment to measure things, as Chris was mentioning. We also actually built our own sensor systems that we bolt that go in on top of everything else, that send us data. So it's our point of truth to see what's actually going on in the facility and make sure everything's operational. So this is the time it plants in. One thing I want to put out there is that for owners, we have found that it's not really a reasonable ask to have the growers responsible for all of the technical stuff that goes into checking out this system that's never worked to find if it's going to work. It's usually commissioning is happening at the same time that the grower's trying to hire a team. They're thinking about plant schedules. It's all hitting them right there. A lot of times they were fairly recently hired. So we find it's really helpful to have separate folks who are focusing on the technical nitty-gritty leading up to that, and kind of checking from the plant's perspective that everything is going to go well. And then we hand the growers a working system. It's really difficult to debug a system that hasn't worked yet. It's like a test airplane and a test pilot. You have to basically be ready for anything. There are probably many things wrong all at once, so it takes a while and to debug and some experience. So next slide. So I'm just going to run through some basic things that kind of show stories from different commissionings. This one shows the importance of when you really get into the system, you're trying to fine tune it. Having the sensors placed in the right spot, the sensors that tell the HVAC systems what to do. This particular one was mounted on the wall. So it's simple stuff like this, but this can be, from day one, you can have a 3 degrees C difference in what you punch in versus what is going to show up right at the plant level, which is where the other sensors are placed. Next slide. All right, HVAC. HVAC is the system that we have found that if something's not going to work, this is usually where it's at. They're big, complex machines. They're a big, complex system. A lot of times, they're coordinating several pieces of equipment. HVAC machines, dehumidifiers in the same room, so there's a lot of coordination to happen. And sometimes the systems they light up and play, they work, and the folks commissioning them says, "Oh, great! They're working. They've worked for an hour. They're holding set point. We're done." But what we found is you have to watch the system closely and test it, and both through all conditions over a period of time. That's why I say a couple weeks is really great to have for this. These condensers, there were fans on the condenser of the HVAC system, so a piece was left off of them at the factory that kept the heat in them at night. So what happened in this case, plants are in the room. It went from 85 to 48 degrees in a cannabis grow room, which is bad. But these are the things you have to watch out for and plan for ahead of time. We caught it on the first night that it happened. We're able to identify it quickly, but still, it would have been better if plants were not in the room. So next slide. This is one of the reasons that we search for light leaks. Again, you turn off the lights and there's no light. You say, great, that's it, we're done. there can be squirrely little problems that you need sensors to sometimes see. Like, for example, control systems can sometimes have noise in them, and with certain lights, they can, older lights now, I think this is mostly fixed, but they can flicker. So it's just important to watch these things over a period of time to make sure you're not having strange flickering lights or one that comes on intermittently for an hour between 2 and 3 a.m. And causes all the plants that are in the room to harm and then ruin a crop. So next slide. So after we've debugged all the big stuff and we're getting into tuning, this is where we can really make a huge difference. This room here has, I believe, 4 HVAC units in it and 2 or 3 dehumidifiers, and they were just they weren't staged in the control system. They all just came on, and then they all turned off, and it created a huge amount of variation in the room. You're seeing here about a 10 degrees Celsius, so 20 degrees Fahrenheit between one point in the room and another point in the room at the same time. So just by tweaking the program, we added a little bit of airflow to this room too. We can take this huge variation that was in the room and now change it into a stable plant environment, and tune it so that first grow, you're right off the bat, you're growing in an environment that will grow great crops, instead of struggling with the problems that an environment that is varying that much will give you in terms of plant health and plant production. Next slide. And this is the last thing, is that for future problems, if we have a moment in time where we know that the system is working as it should and everyone's, it's worked for a while, a thumbs up, this can happen like during the first grow, everyone's happy with it. It's great to basically take a facility snapshot at that time. What can this facility do? What set points can it hit? What can it not? So that way, when things degrade over time or something breaks, you can point to it as a small problem before it becomes a big problem. You can see it in data, in your data from your control system, instead of just kind of degrading a little bit over time over the course of months. A lot of equipment, like HVAC equipment, degrades instead of just breaks all at once one day. Great, thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. That was wonderful. And I'm going to talk about a couple points that I really want to hit home on. Is make someone responsible for the commissioning procedure. Mike suggested, this is interesting, it may not be the grower. From his experience, the grower is going to be very busy with the horticultural aspects and trying to get all the supplies there. As Chris had pointed out, sometimes the fertilizer isn't there, but the company wishes they could commission the fertilizer injector. Make someone responsible, figure out who that is, and then clear their calendars. When you're opening up a facility, this is what's going to happen. Everyone's going to be so excited. Everyone in the company is going to want to get growing. You're going to want to, some people want to come see it, and you just the nickel and diming of all the little things that happen during that period that Mike described, of when you get occupancy to when you get your plants in there. You need some serious space to do this commissioning, and you need to fight for it. So assign to someone, make this ultimate importance. I'm not kidding you, and then clear their calendars. And this would allow you to be much more successful. I love what Mike was showing. These graphs are just gold that he was showing you. They give good examples of what can go wrong, but also it points out to how you can diagnose problems with this data. And Mike was showing some extremes in at least one of those examples, but you'll get so good once you understand your system, your control system in this case, and you're monitoring things. You'll get so good that you'll be able to look at a graph of one of your grow rooms or greenhouse rooms, and you'll see something that's just a little bit off. It's not enough that it's going to set off any alarms on your system. It's just a little off. And then what will happen is you'll begin to recognize that signature of that graph, and you'll be able to say, that's a damper motor that's stuck. You'll be able to figure that out, like it'll get to that point. So that is the other thing why data is so important, and that is why Mike is talking about having handheld meters as well. While we're talking, I want to mention that if you're in California, PG&E has a tool lending library, and it's free to their clients and or folks who are in their service area, and it's amazing what you can borrow from them to help you with your commissioning. And lastly, I want to say a couple of things that happened to me that ring true. Yes, I've actually had a grow room, and this is at Purdue University. You'd expect, again, you'd expect a huge land-grant university to be on top of these things. Thermostat on the wall next to the light switch when you walk into the room, not in the middle of the room where it needs to be. Same room, it'd been painted off-white, not white. It had been painted off-white because offices, you just tend to use off-white. It's much more aesthetically pleasing for human beings, but it's not aesthetically pleasing for plants. They want white. You got to, so we can measure that we lost 5 or 6% of the light because of that dumb paint job that was done. It would have cost. We never did paint over it because it was going to cost like $4,000 to do. And lastly, the other one that I can relate to is lights being left on. Remember Mike's little graph about that? I've seen that happen too. So if you're the grower on this webinar, your job every once in a while is to go into your facility in the middle of the night. Of course, there are little meters that'll do this for you now. Apogee sells some. Looks like Mike has an item that's very a sensor that's really sensitive, so it'll pick up just one light being on. But you should just go into your greenhouse in the middle of the night or your grow room every once in a while just to see what's happening. You might be surprised, and I used to do that quite often when I was managing a facility. Okay, well, thank you, Mike. That was awesome. Next, we will have Bryce tell us about the results of our last poll.
Yeah, and really quickly with the polls, sometimes they pop up behind your Zoom window. Sometimes they pop up on a separate monitor if you've got one. So if you don't see it pop up, just do a little searching around and it should be there. And then also with this poll, we did, unfortunately, we accidentally made it single choice. So sorry about that for all of you selecting. But I'm glad many of you are using controls in your facility. So we can at least take that away.
Great. Next slide, please. Okay, our third technical discussion will be about commissioning from a grower perspective. Before we get to that, let's do our next poll. Please select the types of webinars you are interested in. This is for us at RAI, so because we're doing we're considering doing some changes to how we deliver content and to all of you. So this would be very helpful for our 2024 and 2025 planning. We'll leave that up. You can answer it anytime. So far, this is just a great panel. You've heard from Chris talking about overarching environmental controls and how they handle the commissioning procedure. And Chris will come in if it's his assignment and spend some serious time with you helping with this. And then we heard from Mike, who is a person who can he can be there for that, but he can also be there following up and helping you and to do the fine tuning and to check and make sure everything is still working. So you've got two perspectives. Now let's go to what a grower perspective is. Josh, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. So I'm going to give you kind of my experience that I had commissioning a brand new facility in Los Angeles, which if you're building a new facility, these are very, I can't see how you couldn't run into the problems that I ran into. And I won't even say they were problems. It's more just things to look out for as you're bringing a facility online. Because you can have an engineer that is, designing the room appropriately, and they're going to make it super accurate as far as, hitting your temperature set points, your humidity set points, your lighting set points. However, once you get plants in the room, you're never going to hit those ideal kind of theoretical set points. You're going to have to have someone that's on the team that knows how to really make things precise, to really dial in a room. And if you're going in an indoor market, the precision of of your room is really what's going to put something on the market that demands the indoor price that people are looking for. So I'm going to go through more like catastrophic failure problems that can happen when you're bringing on a facility. Luckily, I didn't have any, but I caught them before they turned into a problem. And it's generally going to happen on your HVAC side, your lighting side, and your irrigation fertigation side. So next slide, please. So commissioning HVAC, once you get plants in these rooms, your environment is going to be extremely dynamic, and really having someone on your team that's gonna be in there daily, as the plants are growing, because obviously the bigger the plants are getting, the more they're going to transpire. So it's gonna really test that HVAC system and how it is at moisture removal, and really seeing where things are going in the room. So having someone that's really checking that environment, with a handheld sensor, not just relying on whatever system you put in on the controls side or your monitoring side, it's absolutely crucial. I can't stress a handheld sensor to really compare things, especially on the calibration side. There's been this site that I'm showing you right here, which is an LA facility. It was designed by a really good, environmental company that really came in and dialed in the HVAC prior. But so I didn't have to do a lot of, calibration on the equipment. But I've been in other facilities where, sensors were off by 4 or 5 degrees, which doesn't sound like a lot from an indoor like, general living situation, but that's huge when it comes to plants, especially when you're bringing plants online. If it's 4 degrees too warm in that early 1 to 2 week of flowering stage, you're going to run into issues. And especially electronic humidistats they're not as accurate as an analog humidistat. So the ones that are integrated into depending on what type of system you're using, the ones that are integrated in there, they're not meant to be super precise. So sometimes you got to get in there with a very precise handheld meter and make it calibrated to the room and what you're actually reading. And that makes a huge difference. So HVAC is a huge area that if you're not in there in the room, you're never going to know what's going on. And everyone likes to look at these rooms like they're automated and you need less human involvement. A good grower is in the rooms every day, and they're in the rooms during the critical stages, lights on, throughout the day, checking various times. And then I'd say if you're not checking your rooms throughout critical stages of growth, like week 1, week 4, week 6, if you're not checking on those environments as the lights are off, you're missing out on opportunities to find ways that you can kind of turn some knobs and dial some things to really dial in the environment in that room. So the things that you'll run into really is normally going to be on those lights off types of growth stages. So right as the lights kick off, you're going to have a humidity spike. I don't care how good you get at dimming your lights or adjusting things on the controls side, you're always going to have a humidity spike that you need to deal with. And if you don't have some, whether it's supplemental dehumidification or, a gas reheat or electric reheat kind of set up on your HVAC equipment, those are the areas where you're going to run into problems. This facility specifically, I caught the first night, we really went to a lights off lights off. I'd say it was week 2 of flower. I was luckily in the facility and caught, our electric reheat failed and humidity was at 100% for, an hour. And I had to get in there and really dig in to figure out what was going on. And like, I had to crawl up in the crawl space and, figure out what was going on while I was on the phone with my HVAC engineer. And if I wasn't there at that time, like there could have been some big problems. So really finding someone that you can have on hand that's checking those things during the critical stages is really important. So let's go on to lighting. So lighting, this is kind of my wheelhouse. Is what I went to grad school, is what I really specialized in when I was at Purdue. And there's lighting controls on the intensity side along with the duration side for photo period control. And the photo period control is easy to monitor from a remote location, because you can see when things are on or off. And almost every state requires cameras in the room, so you can also monitor things remotely from a camera just to make sure, like, hey, did the lights turn off? that's an easy one to do. But the light intensity side, you need to get in those rooms and really do some PAR maps consistently throughout the weeks to look at, hey, am I hitting the PAR levels that I'm trying to achieve throughout the growth cycle? And as good as having a pre, nothing against Priva. I love Priva. It's what I've used when I was at Purdue. I used it a lot in greenhouse and indoor systems. And if you don't have someone adjusting the height of the sensor that's within the room, you're going to get off readings. And it's little things like that give you a false sense of security as you're growing. Because I've met so many growers that their mistakes that are made are so simple that they're not going in the room and checking their sensors. And sensor placement, like with the lighting, is absolutely crucial. Same with your RH and your temperature sensors. Like sometimes they get moved as a bench. If you have rolling benches, sometimes they get caught up on a pole and they end up getting pushed into the inside of the canopy. And then you're like, oh, what's going on? Well, maybe you need to go in there and check it out and really find out, because as you have these big rooms and a lot of them, you just have to have people in there that know what to look for and really find out what's going on in the rooms. And if you have someone who's experienced, I'm not going to tout myself as I'm the best grower in the world, but I can walk in a room and I know the second I walk in there and I look at the plants, hey, the humidity is too high right now. It is way too warm for this crop in this growth cycle. The lights are too bright. And that comes with experience. Not everyone can get there. But as soon as you get in there and you actually work with the plants, you figure it out. You start to find out what the plants like. And, there's definitely an art and a science to this. So let's go ahead and move on to the fertigation side, which I would say if there's really an area where you get a catastrophic failure that is absolutely going to be catastrophic, this is where it's going to be. It's going to be, someone leaving a manual valve, they're going to shut a manual valve as they're doing something. They're going to, be applying some sort of, drench that they're doing through the irrigation, and they're, bypassing their automation and leaving valves open. And then, or opening them, and then they'll close them as they're flushing lines, and then they won't open them back up. So really having someone that's going through, almost like one person that's in charge of the fertigation side of things when you're doing any changes, is going to avoid, one row getting shut off that you don't want to come in the morning and see this one row that all those plants are flagging, and it's pretty easy to figure out what went wrong on that one. I'd say 99% of the time, if you have a good fertigation system, it's human error. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've flooded my fair share of irrigation rooms. Just with when I went to that automated side, I walked away. I was trying to multitask things and came back, and here there's half inch of water in the room. So
Me too,
those
buddy.
are generally where you're going to run into issues where it's going to cause a catastrophic failure. I'd say it's more on that fertigation side. So running those systems before you get plants in the rooms, clearing the lines, really, the photo to the right, once you get plants in there, have checking emitters, checking to make sure each emitter is, hitting each plant. And, you can see when a plant is not getting fertigated properly, it's going to look different than the other ones. So getting in, having people that are kind of going through the rooms, especially on that like first week when you move plants in, normally you're not going to run into issues during the majority of the growth cycle if it's dialed in from the start. So getting things really, really dialed in is key early on. And then I next slide, please. So last thing I kind of wanted to touch on is in your dry rooms. This is an environment that I don't think a lot of HVAC, engineers or mechanical engineers really have fully figured out, depending on how much biomass you're going to have in those rooms. And I'm a golfer, so I kind of look at the dry rooms as like, your work around the green and on the green. Like if you have an 8, 9 week, 10-week cycle, you're getting yourself to the hole. And this is really the important part where you're gonna score big or have a terrible experience on that hole. So if you don't have your dry rooms dialed in on their environment and dialed in on just when you're gonna be bucking these down and putting them into smaller cure buckets, if you're trying to produce premium flower, this is normally where it's going to happen. Even if you had everything perfect, you had a perfect drive, you had a perfect approach shot, you had everything dialed in. If you mess it up here, you're gonna shoot a triple bogey when you are on the green. Like you were on the green in 3, then you shot a triple bogey, which I do a lot. So to kind of wrap it all up, I think just having someone on your team or someone that you have to bring in as a resource is so critical when you're bringing these facilities online, because there's so many things that can go wrong. It's an extremely dynamic environment, and if you want to be successful, you can have a couple bad crops early if you don't have people there to really dial it in, but more than 1 or 2 of those, good luck, especially in this industry. There's a lot of professionals that have figured it out. And if you're just coming online, building a new facility, especially in like a California market, you're going to have a lot of work cut out for you, and you better have deep pockets.
Thank you, Josh. I love the golf analogy. That is just brilliant. And I agree. Dry rooms. I mean, when I was consulting, I knew quite a bit about grow rooms, but the whole dry room thing was just a mystery to me. And so if you happen to be a new company building, you better make sure, even if you got a great horticulturalist, that you've got someone who understands this dry room needs, because it's tricky stuff. And there's a lot of information out there. Some of it might be myth, so be careful. So you really need to pay attention to this. Josh, that was great, and I love what you're talking about mistakes being made, because I know I've made every one of them that can be made by things that you're doing, making changes, and so you need an SOP, actually, or series of SOPs for when you're working on something and repairing something or troubleshooting, to keep you from making a change that comes back to haunt you. And it's typically the grower, because here's an example. Yeah. And I think, and Chris alluded to this, and Josh, you alluded to it, that the manual switch for equipment is a wonderful thing. It is the best tool you've got, just to check and make sure, does the equipment work, before I call my environmental control company and ask them why it's not working. Check and make sure it works. But what happens is, you're doing maintenance, or you're doing an equipment check, and you'll turn that piece of equipment to the off mode, or to the always on mode, not the automatic, allowing the computer control. And you close up the cabinet, you walk away, and you forget that. And then a week later, or maybe that night at midnight, you get an alarm because of this. So we made a silly little SOP that made all the sense in the world. If we took any piece of equipment out of automatic, we put it on or off, we left the cabinet doors open to that panel as a signal to us, don't walk away before checking to make sure everything's in auto. Likewise, and you mentioned it, Josh, valves, like turning off a valve manually. You know, your computer will never know you did that. And so you've got to find a way to tag that, some way to visually tell yourself, oh, don't walk away from here before you turn that back on. Or one of your team members comes walking in after you and says, oh, that valve is tagged as have been closed. Why is that tag still on there? So just a series of simple SOPs to keep you from making these mistakes, because you'll be so busy. You'll be walking through your facility. As Josh says, good growers walk their facilities. They check on things all the time. You have multiple rooms, as is indicated by our surveys, over 10 rooms. You'll get from one side of the facility to the other, and you'll have picked up 4 different tasks that you need to do. This is the kind of life a grower has. So you've got to come up with simple ways to remember things. Also, I had a great story about commissioning with Priva. Was we had kind of ghosts in the machine, as I call it. These weird little alarms, and it was like power outage alarms. And Priva came through the commissioning, just, our electronics subcontractor hadn't tightened down the terminal screws for the little wires for some of the equipment went in. So it was just totally random. I would have found it eventually, but it took someone who's a professional commissioner to know to look for something like that. Anyway, I should stop talking. Let's move on. We'll do actual takeaways, and we'll move on to Caleb talking about incentives from ICF. Here are just some of the takeaways. Integrate equipment for most effective installation, because you can commission it much more easier too. You don't have 7 different manuals that you're using for equipment. Commission to validate that integration of equipment has been done properly. Once the plants are in place, you may need to do fine tuning. You probably will have to do fine tuning. It's a whole different environment once you get plants in there, and there's not a good way to simulate it. You've heard me say it too many times, so I won't shout it this time. I'll whisper it. Commissioning needs to start in design phase. I love this mantra, bad news early is good news. I think that was Mike's. That's a great saying. So again, that comes down to going out and checking things and trying to catch problems before they turn into alarm situations. And lastly, changes during the construction phase are more likely to be troublesome than ones earlier, because it's just like we described about the grower making some little change but not telling anyone about it. My last takeaway, because I've got an extra 30 seconds here, is keep, as a grower or the person in charge of making sure the facility is operating properly. It sounds silly, but you will forget things that went wrong and what caused them and how you fixed them. So I kept a notebook. I would print off, of course you could do this in Google Docs as well. At the time I had a hard copy, I'd print off graphs of when things went wrong. And I'd say, this is what the graph looked like, or any other thing that went wrong. And you just have a log, and that way you'll see a problem happen and you'll say to yourself, I fixed this before, but I don't remember how I did it because it happened 7 years ago. And so that is another great way. Part of your SOPs is to have that kind of log there as well. Next slide. And thank you, Josh Gerovac. That was awesome. Is Caleb with us, Bryce?
Caleb is not with us,
Okay.
but I just wanted to share that you can access this deck after the recording, and you can look at the incentives that ICF has presented on behalf of SCE.
Thank you, Bryce. And Caleb has gone through those on the first 3 webinars. So a lot of you have been to all these webinars or heard these before, but they're quite generous. There's a whole diverse set of incentives. So I think you can find something there, or maybe more than one incentive that might fit what you are doing. Okay, we're going to move on to question and answer for our panel. Bryce, is there anything that's come up? I haven't looked at the chat recently. Has there anything that's come up?
We do not have anything from participants.
And you actually had some questions. You or Carmen had sent me some questions. Do you have that available?
Yeah, I can start that off. Yeah, maybe we'll start. Let's see, maybe this is more directed toward Chris or Mike, but anyone can answer. When you first meet with a grower, where does commissioning rank on their list of priorities?
I can start with that one. Yeah. Usually when I'm on site, there's a lot of stuff happening all at once, and everything's kind of coming together at the same time. So when I meet growers, usually I'm coming in kind of when everything's finished, kind of electrically and mechanically. And my experience with growers is there's always a million things going on. So I would say it's one of many things on the top of their mind, but it's always a very hectic time, kind of around that time when I go on site with people, I would say. I think everybody's been there.
It's low priority, and a lot of times, especially early in the design, we are explaining to grower or the owners, sometimes are the same, what commissioning is, and that what the startup phase entails, just because these are usually bigger systems than a lot of folks have operated in the past. It operated as small grower, familiar with like getting everything working the first time, but when it's big, it's overwhelming. So yeah, it's usually it's not on the radar.
Anything to add, Josh? I'll have another question if we're ready to move on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm surprised by that, on it not being a priority. I would say, and I might have a different perspective because I came from working with an LED company and understanding a little bit more of engineering than some growers might. But I mean, anytime I had anyone from Priva at my facility, I was using them as a resource every single minute they were there, because I didn't want to have to try to find someone to talk to when things went wrong. I wanted to figure it out before it went wrong and understand, how their systems worked, especially, working with mechanical engineers also. It's, I do have a little bit more of an engineering mindset. So I might be a little bit different than a few growers out there, but I think you need to find someone that understands the systems. Like, if it doesn't have to be the grower, but you have to have someone on your team that does understand those systems and is on site to ask the right questions. Because if you don't, you're just waiting for a problem to arise and then not be able to solve it when it does come up, because it's going to happen. I don't care if you have the best designed facility and you have the best team on your hand. If you don't have the right people there to ask the questions prior to that problem happening, you don't want that problem to be there. Like, on a day that, no one's going to be there, or a day that is Christmas Eve, or a day that's, a day that doesn't, bode towards a weekend.
Josh, you bring up a great point about a lot of growers don't have the engineering background or necessarily mechanical background. Priva had to teach me how to use a voltmeter. I mean, think about that. I was already 30-something years old and I didn't know how to use a voltmeter. I would say, particularly in today's environment in CEA, whether it's cannabis or other crops, it might be a yellow flag if you have a grower that's only interested in plants. To me, that person should be managing a conservatory. I think with a CEA facility, creating medicinal plants or food plants in the complex integrated systems that we have now, that grower doesn't have to be an engineer, but they should have an interest in it, don't you think?
Absolutely. At least have a curiosity to understanding how the systems work, and having resources around them where they can find out an answer to a question. The curiosity is the key part, and no one's going to be the best at everything unless you're Michael Jordan, and he's probably I don't know if he's dabbling in CEA yet, but he should be. But
let me ask.
No,
Go ahead.
It's literally there's resources out there to find answers if you know where to look, and there's a lot of, if you work with the right manufacturers of the equipment that are going into your facility that you're spending all this money on, like, they should have a good resource network for you. Obviously, RII is a great resource as well for the manufacturers that don't have, the money or infrastructure to put information out there for you. But you need to be able to tap into the resources and look where to find prior to problems happening, because that's like, you're almost like a problem. You're like a problem finder when you're growing indoors. You have to like be like, a detective of like looking for problems before they come up, because they're gonna, like, that's the one certainty in indoor growing is you're gonna run into problems, and you got to figure out ways to think quickly and be able to solve those before something really dramatic goes wrong. So yeah, I think the CEA grower, the indoor grower, is a different grower than an outdoor grower, or even a greenhouse grower, because you're using with more, you're utilizing systems that are not as, they're more finicky. Like, they're just more finicky.
Right. I'm curious, Mike or Chris, do you see differences over the last, since you first started in your jobs, and what are growers becoming more than just horticulturalists? Or if you don't have an answer to that, do you see definite differences between the kind of grower in a greenhouse as in an indoor farm, as far as their ability to integrate both engineering and plant science?
Yeah, I think to your point, Rob, about the yellow flag is Yeah, you don't have to be an expert at troubleshooting mechanically or electrically, but to have some little bit of knowledge, like even like your comment about the multimeter, I can troubleshoot something with somebody on the phone if they have a basic knowledge of how to use a multimeter or um, even kind of just having the idea of what equipment to look at. Like, okay, go look at the vent motor, what's happening. If they say, where's the vent motor? I'm in some situations, I'm lots of kilometers away, so I can't really help. I can't tell you where it is. I've never been to site, but yeah, if you have a basic knowledge of just what is what, basic knowledge of how to use a multimeter, yeah, you could think of a simple example of troubleshooting a temperature sensor. Okay, put a multimeter over the two wires and tell me what you read. If you can do that, just with a basic knowledge of mechanical or electrical, we're on the phone with you, so we can guide you through it. It's just a matter of getting hands on something and understanding just a little bit of what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I again, I can't tell you how many times that previous service has done that with me and just talked me through it, very patient. And sometimes I would not have a clue, but they taught me some of this stuff and I slowly learned, but I was curious. I really wanted to understand how it all worked. Mike, do you have any other comment on that before I jump to another question?
Yeah, we've seen the attitude of indoor growers go way up over the last, since legalization, and there's so many, state by state, and there's so many more indoor facilities. People have experience in them, so we see that ramping up, and we generally see indoor growers at cannabis facilities. They're generally at smaller shops. Sometimes at a multi-acre greenhouse, you've got a facilities manager or other folks, but the small growers, indoor growers usually have to know all that stuff because it's their responsibility too, in addition. So they usually have see that as a common thing now. They have a working knowledge of at least all the systems to like work with Chris on the phone to debug something or to kind of have a good inkling of who to call first.
Great point. And I'm wondering if in the cannabis industry, it could be the opposite of what you're talking about. It could be you've got a grower who is really good mechanically because they started in the gray market and built their own facility, but they don't have the background in the plant science. So it could be that it kind of goes both ways. That someone who's grown geraniums might have the plant background, but not the engineering, but just the opposite with the cannabis growers. I've got another commissioning question because I know this came up a lot of times. We'll start with Chris again. A lot of customers, your clients, won't understand who is responsible for what if something goes wrong. I mean, if the shade curtain motor isn't operating, Chris, you can be on the phone with them and confirm. The first thing you do is confirm why is it not operating, and then you get to a point where, well, this is not a computer problem. This is now a problem with the motor. So you need to contact who made that motor or who sold you that motor. You can confirm to me whether that's an issue, and is there any way that a new client, should they make a checklist? Should someone give them instructions about who is responsible for what?
I think that's very important. It's a good point. My number one thing, if somebody calls me and says, "Hey, this vent motor is not working," I tell them to go to especially kind of highlights the importance of having interfacing as well, or accessible interfacing, whether it's kind of like an all-in-one top to bottom panel that includes all your interfacing, all your computer, all your protection devices. If somebody calls me and says, "Hey, my vent motor's not working," I say, "Okay, go to the panel. Does it work from the switch?" If it doesn't work from the switch, then I know I'm not going to be able to control it with the computer. If they say, "Hey, yeah, it does work in manual," then I can test, from the computer, does it work to the switch, back to the computer? Maybe it's a settings issue, maybe it's an electrical issue, but I can kind of direct traffic that way. And to your point about people not knowing, if there's a grower that's just been hired after the commissioning happens, they weren't involved originally, so they don't know who is on site, where those pieces of equipment came from. And people will call us and say, "Hey, I need help with a vent motor," and we can do exactly that. Test from the panel going out. If it's not working there, then we know to direct them to the provider of that piece of equipment. And yeah, it's very handy to have a quick list and say, okay, who provided that vent motor to you? And they can look at the list and say, oh, is this company? They can call them directly, and it kind of cuts down on troubleshooting time, and it gets things moving a little bit more quicker.
I guess, yeah, that should be a part of the punch list process, that you actually identify contact names for who is at these different vendors or who is responsible for something.
Yeah.
Mike, do you find yourself in the middle of this as well, trying to figure out, or the client doesn't understand who they should have called, the controls company or the equipment company?
Absolutely. We find ourselves in the referee position a lot, because
That's right.
this happens a lot. Can't be my problem. And then there's no one on the ground. So we end up on being the one on the ground that has to go into the figure it out. And that's a technical job, but figure out like whose fault is it that this thing isn't working. It's sometimes very difficult to tell. Yeah, so that is a big part of it, is a lot of times convincing a manufacturer of a piece of equipment that their thing is actually the problem and not this other thing. So yeah, that's a big part of it.
That's great. That's great. We just have a couple minutes. I want to I'm going to ask Josh. I'm going to tell a couple of stories and see if Josh has any more. Here's some things that have gone wrong that I've either been a part of or caused or observed. That could have been solved with better commissioning. Shade curtain motors in a greenhouse. Chris wisely discussed about, you've got to actually go out there and time how long it takes for the curtain to close and how long it takes for it to open, and program that into your controller so it knows about where that shade curtain is going to be. That's one part of it. Another part of it is, you should probably put, if you're in a greenhouse with shade curtains, you need to put some sort of limit on how many times that curtain can open and close a day, or something to keep it from, if you got a partly cloudy day, opening, closing, opening, closing. I've burned out motors because I didn't realize that the curtain was opening and closing 100 times in a day. So again, commissioning would have solved that problem. Another commissioning issue, I should say, it has more to do with construction walkthroughs, and which is the kind of part of the commissioning to me that typically when you're building something, that there'll be construction meetings routinely, and the general contractor will be there and whatever vendors happen to be on site that day. But the owners should go to those. They should assign someone to go. And sometimes the grower is if they can have time, is good. Because we caught a case where there's supposed to be an access door from the hallway into where the back of our evaporative pads, so we could do maintenance and repairs. Well, they poured the footings and the knee walls of the first greenhouse, and they didn't put the access door slot in there. I mean, that would have been, if we would have built the whole facility without those access doors, we would have been taking off glass panels every time we needed to get in there. Josh, does that ring any bells of crazy stuff that you've heard or seen?
Oh, 100%. Like I just being kind of a leader of the Foot Clan, just being on the ground as you know, the construction was being done. Like the first flower room that was being built in an LA facility that I was in charge of, you know, we had a great construction team on site, and you know, I gave them, you know, exactly where I wanted the benches to be placed for rolling benches. And if I wouldn't have been there the day that they were setting the footings, like for those rolling benches, they would have been off by 6 inches, and we would have lost, you know, I mean, 3 inches on every aisle spacing, but that's a lot. Like when you get people walking, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have a tight spacing in a room, I caught that. And like, so it's good to have people, you know, checking and verifying that your crew on site gets that. You know, I have a construction background too, so like offset spacing, depending on how you're telling them to do it, if there's not someone there as they're laying the first footing, they can get it wrong. And you know, you can't you can unbolt those, but they're setting, you know, those benches in space. And if they're doing that, you better have plants that are coming in to move into those very shortly after. And you don't want to slow down your you know, you're bringing plants into the room because someone's off by 6 inches. Like that's just stuff that you should have someone double checking always.
Yeah, I love it. Great story, Josh. We need to wrap up today. Our time is up. I want to thank Southern California Edison for supporting this webinar series. It means a lot to us at RAI to have this sort of support. I want to thank our expert panelists, Chris Androney from Priva, Mike Zartarian from Zartarian Engineering, Josh Gerovac from Symbiescent, and also ICF for their contributions throughout this webinar series. For Bryce Carlton, I'm Rob Eddy from Resource Innovation Institute. Thank you for attending today.